The Russian Civil War, which erupted in the chaotic aftermath of the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, was a conflict of immense scale and complexity. It was a brutal struggle that pitted the newly formed Red Army of the Bolsheviks against a collection of anti-Bolshevik forces known as the White Movement. On the surface, the Whites seemed to hold advantages: experienced Tsarist officers and material aid from foreign powers. The United States, Great Britain, France, and Japan sent limited troops, warships, and supplies. On paper, the influx of material seemed to tip the scales in favor of the Whites. Yet by 1922, the White armies were comprehensively defeated, and the Bolsheviks cemented control over Russia. So, why did the White movement collapse despite international support? The answer lies not in a single failure, but in deep-seated weaknesses aid could not fix. Internal divisions, no compelling future vision, and failure to match Red organizational efficiency. Allied aid was inconsistent, half-hearted, and driven by conflicting interests. Worse, it gave the Bolsheviks a potent propaganda tool to brand the Whites as puppets of foreign invaders. The White movement's most fundamental weakness was profound disunity, a patchwork of forces separated by vast distances and ideologies. Monarchists, constitutional democrats, socialists, and would-be dictators aligned only by hatred of Bolshevism, not by a common program. On government, economy, and minority rights, they were deeply and often violently divided. Generals like Denikin, Kolchak, and Yudenich acted as warlords, not a unified command. They failed to coordinate, letting the Reds defeat them in detail. As Denikin drove on Moscow in 1919, Red troops freed by Kolchak's defeat moved west to stop him. Kolchak was named supreme ruler, but his authority was rarely recognized. Rivalry and mistrust trumped strategy. Each army fought its own separate war. By contrast, Trotsky's centralized command enforced discipline and exploited White fragmentation with ruthless precision. The war turned on peasant allegiance, over 80% of Russia. Bolsheviks legitimized land seizures in 1917, winning passive support or neutrality. Whites signaled restoration, former landlords and officials in their ranks, stoking village fears. In White zones, reprisals, land reversals, and crop seizures confirmed the worst suspicions. Stories spread by gossip and Red propaganda made the Reds the lesser of two evils. War communism embittered peasants, sparking green rebellions against both Reds and Whites. White elitism alienated villagers. Peasants were commanded, not persuaded. Reds spoke simply and directly, carrying their message to the countryside. Without popular support, the Whites suffered desertion, weak recruiting, scarce food and horses, an army blind and starving in hostile lands. Geography and logistics were decisive, and the Bolsheviks held the heartland from the start. They controlled the demographic and industrial core, and crucial armaments factories. With railways as arteries of war, interior lines let them shift forces rapidly. Trotsky coordinated from an armored train, rushing elite units and supplies between fronts. When Petrograd was threatened in 1919, seasoned troops arrived in time to stop the assault. White armies were separated by enormous distances and could not support each other. Foreign aid entered peripheral ports, then crawled over rickety single-track rails ripe for sabotage. Much was lost before reaching the front. Meanwhile, the Reds' shorter, secure lines kept units better supplied under a functioning, if ruthless, central state apparatus. Foreign intervention is widely misunderstood. Lists of troops, ships, and supplies look impressive, but aid was too little, too late, and too disorganized to decide the war. Allies intervened first to check Germany and secure stockpiles. After the armistice, their purpose fractured. Churchill urged strangling Bolshevism. Leaders and war-weary publics refused. U.S. forces had orders to avoid combat. French morale collapsed at Odessa. British sent tanks and planes but mostly guarded ports. Japan deployed the most troops, but pursued its own sphere, not a unified white offensive. There was no joint command. Foreign troops never joined decisive operations. Intervention gifted the Reds a propaganda coup in a country wary of outsiders. Withdrawals in 1919 and 20 left whites dependent on fading aid. As Denikin and Kolchak hit their peaks, Western will evaporated. A civil war cannot be won by proxy. The war was fought with posters, slogans, and ideas as much as bullets. The Bolsheviks mastered mass communication. The whites did not. Reds offered peace, land, and bread, a clear, resonant promise tailored to workers and peasants. They framed a class war, oppressed masses versus capitalists, aristocrats, and foreign backers. White propaganda was amateurish, fragmented, and ideologically confused. Appeals to nationalism fell flat against the peasants' fear of losing land. Written in legalistic language by officials and intellectuals, their message missed the masses. Reds spoke the language of street and village, promising a role in a new world. The whites fell to interconnected failures, no unity, no program, chaotic logistics, and hostile populations. The Bolsheviks triumphed through centralized command, ruthless methods, propaganda mastery, and control of the industrial heartland and railways. Allied aid was a bandage on fatal internal wounds. The war was won and lost within Russia, not by foreign hardware, but by political cohesion and a compelling vision.